My name is Ritu Varma. I run a fund called Ankur Capital, and I think I'm here because of the virtue of the fact that this fund actually invests in a lot of agri startup companies. We're looking at innovation, and we're looking at solutions to the larger agri problem that there is here. So I'm honored to be here to join a lot of people on this panel who have a lot of deep agri experience and are working at changing agriculture from different points of views in different parts of the globe. So I'm going to walk through a few of the things that we're going to talk about, and then let these gentlemen here talk about their views of what and how they see solutions in the future. So what I guess all of us probably know is that the number of people in this world is going to grow. We're going to be 9.7 billion is the prediction in the next 30 years. And we all still need to eat. So where and how is that food going to come? And the prediction is that perhaps productivity or agriculture yields have to increase by 70%. How is that going to happen? So that's one part of it. That's talking about the numbers here. But there's another part to it. How and what we eat and the intensity of that has also gone up over the last decade or so. So the pressures on the planet to be able to produce the kind of food that we want to eat, the water intensity, the things we want to eat in different parts of the world that traditionally don't quite grow there, all of these also add to the stress going through the future. So what I would like all of my panelists here to sort of talk about is what is the technology revolution, if it's a technology revolution, or what is the revolution, let me say, that will happen to address this issue in front of us over the next, let's say, 20 years. Yeah. So each of them have a very unique perspective on it. So what I'm going to request is that all of you introduce yourself and what you do very briefly. So I'm going to start with the gentleman on my right, who's been involved in this for a long, long time, and perhaps has a view of the past as well as the future. So I would love to get your views on, where you think we are going here.
Thank you, Ritu. My name is Shivakumar. I work for an Indian company, ITC, which is into a fairly large canvas of agri-businesses, most of them linked to consumer brands at the front end and going back all the way to agriculture and agricultural R&D. And when this panel was coming up, and one of the first questions that the group thought about was, how do you envision agriculture in 20 years? I was noting down some thoughts, but then I thought, maybe I should crowdsource this to my social media friends. And plenty of them have experience in agriculture. So 3 days ago, I had put up this one question on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And it was an overwhelming response. And when I just list them down, it came to 20 pages. And so I quickly synthesized some of that and called out what I also believe is how we would look at this 20 years going forward. So obviously, the future will be shaped by current aspirations of people. And one perspective Ritu already talked about, which is the consumer perspective. So the consumer perspective that got voiced in these inputs was one, of course, is given that it will be a large population, sufficient quantity, and given that we are talking about food, tasty. Otherwise, somebody also said, with nanobots in our bloodstream and with our memory possibly already put on the cloud, we probably won't need food, but we may just need some battery and solar power. So that's not inconceivable. But keeping that aside, tasty obviously is one element in food, and safe, which is a big concern today, and nutritious, which is another concern, and obviously all this at reasonable prices. So which is the consumer aspiration as to what are we looking for. Then of course the most important stakeholder when it comes to agriculture and food is the farmer. And with billions of small farmers around the world, higher incomes is an important aspiration. given that per capita income for, when you take emerging economies like India, the farmers per capita is hardly a fourth or fifth of the national per capita. It must double, triple, and probably more than that in these 20 years that we are seeing, and at lower risk, not just income, because quite often the farmer is facing risk on production as well as in pricing front, and some dignity for labor, because that's been one of the major issues why the next generation of farmers is not interested, besides that not being attractive from a financial perspective, and a better quality of life in villages where they live and cultivate. So these are the aspirations from the farmers. At a broader society level, there are aspirations with respect to conserving and renewing natural resources. And if you just look at India as one example, and my other global friends I'm sure will talk about it at a global level. In India, we are 17% of world's population, but only 4% of world's freshwater resources, and only 2.5% of world's land. Topsoil being an important part of that land when you talk about agriculture. And consequently, one needs to look at conserving and renewing. And being resilient to climate change. I mean, today we see rains in summer and very warm winters, and none of this anymore surprises us because now it's been happening for the last few years. And therefore, how are you resilient to agriculture, resilient to climate change in agriculture, and possibly contribute to mitigating the impact of climate change also, because agriculture can do several things in terms of carbon sequestration and so on and so forth, and release of certain gases, and carbon miles is a big issue in agriculture depending on where it is grown and where it is consumed and so on. Now, if these are the aspirations, how would they shape? And I gave 3 titles to all the ideas that came from these 200 odd inputs from my friends. First is, like already Ritu mentioned, farms will become factories. That means you are producing designer, in some sense, products that the consumers are seeking. We talked about consumer aspirations. Therefore, using all technology and producing as per consumer needs, and the riding on ideas like Industry 4.0 and IoT and many of these things, without necessarily listing all the technologies. The most interesting idea which came is about self-managing adaptable seeds. They said, yeah, you put the seed in, it will germinate and open up by sensing if the weather is going to be a very wet season or is it going to be a dry season, what kind of soil will be there. But this is still in the imagination stage. I'm sure what is imagined today will be a reality tomorrow. And so obviously from a protected agriculture where we cover everything into greenhouses and polyhouses and so on, the times have come. And actually, I know even 20 years ago, we had interesting examples on coated seeds that these germinate, open up, and then after that, if there is continuous period of drought, they will germinate a second time. So those things are even things of past at one point of time, though it was not commercially a big success. So therefore, this is one kind of shift that will occur. The second interesting theme is homes will become farms. Right now, only some people have farms at homes besides the farmers who do it as a profession. Like I have a large farm in my backyard together with a greenhouse. So all the vegetables that we grow are sufficient enough not only for all our colony but also to a lot of friends. And some of this will become increasingly common. With vertical agriculture coming in, it will also assure the consumer of a safety. And not everything obviously can be grown. Some things can be grown like this, but that is something which will happen, and probably some of that we'll talk about in due course of time in the session. But while farms will become factories, homes will become farms as another theme that came through. And third, I'm titling as, in some sense, a back to basics, that if all the 3 aspirations were to be taken together, it will not be the chemically intensive, input intensive monoculture that we have come to live with in the recent past, but more likely to be integrated polyculture or a permaculture. There's multiple crops which gives that biodiversity, as well as a fair amount of livestock and animal husbandry, which will be part of that. And you'll have things like beekeeping. And most interestingly, production of renewable energy can be an important part of a farming activity. Whether you look at solar, whether you look at wind, or whether you look at biogas, depending on whatever activities that are there. So that, in a sense, is back to basics. This is what we have been doing. The first time I went to sell an insurance product to a farmer, about 20 years ago now, saying that here, because of government subsidy and very interesting design of the product, all you need to pay is 5% premium and your risk is covered. So once in 20 years, you face a risk and it is covered, so it looks like a reasonable premium. This farmer said, no, it doesn't make sense, because the way you are talking is like one crop and once in 20 years, but I have a mix of 4 crops. And within 4 crops, 2 of them have multiple planting dates of different varieties. So unless your premium comes down to 2%, it doesn't make sense to me. So those who are aware are able to manage their risks also in this interesting manner, which is basically talking about going back to basics in terms of polyculture and permaculture. So I thought these are the 3 very interesting themes that emerged. I'm just synthesizing and putting these kind of titles as to where the future that we can envision in 20 years from now.
Thank you. I'm going to get a different perspective in here. And would you say that's the India perspective, or was that the global perspective? What was the social media crowdsourcing?
Yeah, nearly 95% of these inputs were from Indians, but reasonably global Indians.
Okay.
The nature of issue that we talked about in terms of climate change and consumer concern about food and farmers. Okay, in some countries with a huge amount of subsidy, farmers may be better off, but nonetheless, unless you integrate all this modern technology, even there you are competing.
Okay.
So
okay.
It's more applicable to Indian and some other emerging economies, but I guess equally applicable in some sense to every part of the world also.
I'm going to turn to you, Maxim, right? And I think you work with 2 very interesting components: water, as well as, making something a farm that is traditionally not a farm. Yeah. So we'd love to get the Israeli perspective, and the other piece is the fact that, you're coming from somewhere which has a lot of stressed land, has already had to deal with a lot of the issues that were mentioned about climate change, etc. How do you see things changing 20 years from now? I mean, what is going to take that productivity level up to a completely different power?
So, hello to everybody. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Maxim Pasik. I am the chairman of the big group of companies that invest in different fields like real estate, infrastructure, high-tech technology, nanotechnology, water, agriculture, etc. I'm also serve as a vice chairman of Euro-Asian Jewish Congress. It's Congress that contains 27 countries, including India. And it's my pleasure, it's my first time coming to India, it's my pleasure to be here. And recently, we invested in 2 interesting companies that we are focusing and give almost all of our time to these 2 projects. So first project is WaterGen. And WaterGen is a company that making water from the air in the most revolutionary technology, that it takes very small amount of energy in order to produce 1 liter of clean, safe drinking water. Almost 250 watt per liter, so it's almost nothing. And it's comparable to the best mineral water that you drink. And the second company is Vertical Fields. That company find also pioneer technology in order to make the food and to clean the air vertically. So actually what we are doing and those technologies are, by the way, connected, because as you told, we need the food, but we need the water in order to grow the food. So if we don't have the water, proper water to grow the food, so we will not have the food. So it's two issues that are connected to one to other. And we invested in those companies because we would like to help to the people. This is our first priority. For sure, it's not NGO, it's pure business companies, but we would like to help the people because we think that this is the most two important aspects that the humanity is handling now is the scare of the lack of the clean drinking water and also the huge pollution that we have in the cities. So actually the vertical field company, I would like to show because I don't have the pictures here. This is the project that we did in Israel. This is a 17 floors building that we covered from all the sides with green forest. And why the people should cover the buildings with the green forest? Because of pollution, because we don't have space in order to put the trees. So what we are doing, we're taking the building either from inside or from outside, and we are covering all the building with the trees. So you have the vertical forest on the trees. And actually, the 1,000 meters of this forest is equal that you put 50 trees or 15 meters each in order to clean the air. So it's a lot of space. Nobody has space because the people now coming from the villages to the cities. So it's happening not only in India, it's happening everywhere. It's happening also in Israel, in Tel Aviv. In Tel Aviv is full of people, and also the pollution is high. Not like here, but the pollution is very high, and we need to clean the city, and we don't have the space. So this is the excellent solution in order to clean the cities, because it's fully scalable. You can make walls of tens of thousands of meters with big trees. It's not small grass that you put, it's very big. And the plus of this technology that is cleaning a lot of air, it is taking a very small amount of water because this system is fully computerized with very smart irrigation system. So it's taking very small amount of air, of water, and actually it's also connected to the air condition of the building. And on top of this to our water gen technology, so you don't need any water in order to make the vertical forest on your buildings inside or outside. So this is one aspect. The second aspect is regarding the vertical farming. We don't have space. As I told, the people are moving from villages to the cities. We have more and more pollution in the water, so we have problems also with the food because we need the water in order to make the food. So we made in 2015 and presented the State of Israel in Milano in Expo 2015, and we created the biggest vertical farming wall in the world that actually we can grow vertically from corn to rice to wheat to whatever. So actually you can imagine that you can put in Mumbai the wall of 5,000 meters that is vertically, they don't require any space because it's going to the height, that you can put here whatever you wish. And it's taking, again, the small amount of water, it's produce you a very healthy food without any nutrients and anything. And it's cleaning a lot of air, and it's also very nice. On top of that, one of the benefits of these walls that we are now working with different countries is to teach people for the smart agriculture, because it is very smart agriculture. Everything here is computerized from A to Z, everything. So it's interesting because in nowadays, the young people are not interested in agriculture because it's old. But what we are doing the high-tech agriculture, the smart agriculture. So actually we provide to the young people to start to deal with agriculture because it's interesting for them. And this is our two solutions that we provide.
So I'm going to turn to you. If you could introduce yourself and sort of give us perhaps, I mean, you have a global perspective, you're looking at entrepreneurs, you're looking at innovations.
True.
From 5 continents, you said, right? So he's talked about the Israeli situation in which he thinks, land is scarce, so both water, having a, what I would call an integrated system and moving that to vertical farming is something that he sees in the future from the Israeli context.
Israel is quite advanced and
So
it's a point
so
of
maybe we
reference
don't talk
for
about
many.
Israel, but about the other countries, etc., and the innovations that you see,
look,
and what you see for the next 20 years.
I'm Michael Stangos from Industry Disruptors. It's an organization that started 5 years ago in Greece as a reaction to the huge crisis that Greece was undergoing. I'm an entrepreneur. We survived the crisis, so we decided bottom up to help youngsters to achieve their ideas and become and change also the culture and become more entrepreneurial. We see many verticals. One of the verticals that we focused from 2014 is agro-food innovation. We created Future Agro Challenge, which organically grew in 64 countries by now. And it's actually creating agro-innovation hubs ecosystem. It starts with a talent discovery. It's a global competition that is running in these countries, and actually try to identify the most innovative ideas and startups in the agro-food section. And after that, we try to help them grow through a virtual and physical incubation process. We bring them together and we create networks for them as a go-to-market strategy. We take them, if they are mature enough, to big exhibition like Zanuga and Sial in Europe, or Dubai exhibition, or big innovation conferences like DLD in Israel, if it's regarding AgriTech. And also we gather once a year together. This year we were in South Africa, part of the Global Entrepreneurship Congress of GEN, Global Entrepreneurship Network. And 2018 we were going to be in Istanbul. We fly there this year will be 2018 will be more than 100 startups. We try to bring also relevant investors to match them equally and there discover opportunities for working together. And it's a 3-day Agripreneur Summit. We bring important people to discover exactly what are the new areas that they should focus. And also we're trying to go down to the farmers as well, because exactly agripreneurship is not so sexy. And the youngsters, they go directly to tech. But imagine that we have two different situations. One is that we concentrate into big cities, and then we need to go to vertical farming, but at the same time, only 10% of the planet is being cultivated. So, especially in developing countries, and I'm going to the global perspective, each continent has completely different need to address. Bottom line, the water is the key element, but when we go to Africa, where there is no electricity or partially in India, you have to address completely different needs, and the solutions you need to give, they will end up being technological, but also you need to train the mindset of the people and the farmers and help them, because someone at the end of the day has to be on the land and do the work. So this is briefly what we do.
And what do you see happening to change in the next 20 years?
Look, for sure the disruption will be technological. Blockchain in agriculture will be one of the major issues. There is a big question also we need to address about food and about genetically modified crops and where this is going. We need also to address obesity. Obesity is growing in all over the world and is huge implication for all healthcare systems. And there should be, and there is a turn to healthier food. But how we achieve healthier food, again, is a big challenge. So it's for sure is going technological. It's a no-brainer. But how we end up there and how we actually put more people in agriculture, it's a big challenge.
So if I hear you right, you're saying technology is going to play a role, but in addition to technology playing a role, we also need to get more people involved in agriculture as opposed to leaving agriculture. That's an interesting perspective, because in India, we kind of have the opposite problem, right? 40% of the people, 15% of the GDP. I think people need to leave agriculture is what the way we sort of look
there,
at it.
the disruption should be bigger technologically.
Right.
But, if you bottom line is what you started saying. By 2050, 9 billion, more than 9 billion people need to eat food, you know.
Last but not the least, I mean, we've heard enough about climate issues and sort of, that being a significant component here, right? So will you tell us what you do and sort of, your view on the 20-year horizon here?
Sure. Just introduce myself. My name is Ramana Gogula. I run the clean technology innovation aspect of Stanley Black & Decker. Stanley Black & Decker is, as all of you know, is primarily a tools company. They make some of the best tools in the world. It's a $12 billion company. About a year ago, I got approached by them to carve out a clean tech strategy for a large social problem in India. So that was the reason I was hired. And a little bit myself, I'm a social entrepreneur, started 3 companies, failed successfully twice, and moderately successful once. But I've also been a VC for 2 companies. I've funded companies, we've looked at startups. I have a good understanding of the ecosystem of entrepreneurs and the mindset. And so with all this experience, we are now looking at a large social problem to solve. And my advice was before I took this job is, most people sit in laboratories and work out solutions or sit before the computers and carve out problem-solving ideas based on Google searches. And I think social innovation should be outside in. It can't be inside out. If you want to do corporate innovation, you have to go out into the field. You have to sit with the farmer. So I made a deal that I'm going to do this job, but we're going to do it outside in. So we took an 8-acre farm close by over here. And this farmer he's got mangoes, coconuts, vegetables primarily in this area. It's semi-arid, Telangana. And the social problem that we identified was basically pumps. India has about 25 million pumps in this country. 15 million are AC, primarily. About 10 million are diesel pumps. The 15 million AC pumps draw 1/5 of the total electricity we generate in this country. 20% of the electricity we generate in India is eaten up by inefficient AC pumps. The diesel pumps, the 10 million of them, spit out hundreds of millions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, right? And are causing tremendous atmospheric pollution. Stanley Black & Decker is a company that wants to build business around a social purpose. That's our purpose, to make this world a better place. So we decided this is what we're going to look at. So this is the problem on the outside. If you look at our organization, what are our core competencies? We make some of the best motors in the world, right? The drive power tools. We use a lot of lithium-ion batteries. So I said, let's look at these 2 components, technology components, and see how we can retrofit them into the large social problem, which is pumps. Every pump is a motor, right? So we are now building an agriculture platform, at the heart of which is a BLDC motor, a brushless DC motor, that sinks into these bore wells and pulls out water. We just did the first test a month ago, and we can now draw about 100,000 liters of water a day with this highly efficient brushless DC pump that we designed. The other aspect of this whole innovation is that, just like when cell phones started, right, primarily used for data. Your voice, you're talking to somebody else. But around the phone, the innovation, the camera, the social media, the banking systems, the applications, the games, these are all innovations at the periphery. So we are now using this solar technology to run this pump. And what we thought was, what if we take the excess energy we generate as we draw water from the earth and push it into a small home for off-grid lighting? Take some of this excess energy, push it into a cold storage, so the farmers can actually put their vegetables into a cold storage on their farms and wait for the right prices before they go out and start selling them. It's supply chain for agriculture. What if we took a little bit of this energy and drove a drip irrigation system so that you don't deplete the water table, right? So you use water effectively. What if the pump had a brain of its own, so that you can take the demographics of the land, you can take the demographics of the farmer, find out the soil content, the moisture, the atmospheric pressure, and you shoot it out to a bunch of people who can then look at this data and analyze how best to make the farmer productive, right? So this is what I see, to answer your larger question. Digital farming, right, and micro irrigation are important aspects to turn farms into factories. I'm very impressed with what I heard, with what the gentleman from Israel was talking about, vertical farming. I think it's definitely an area to go into. And Shiv has, so wisely alluded to the three aspects of, I think, the changes that are going to happen. And I think urban farming is huge. I have a home here in Hyderabad, and my belief is, because I'm into solar, that outdoor lighting should be free. Outdoor lighting, you should never pay for it, even if you're not going to invest heavily into solar. I believe so. I talk to everybody in my community. We live in a large community, about 120 homes. So now, every home now is slowly moving into this concept of, okay, my gate lights from the sun, my garden lights from the sun, maybe a small light at the backyard from the sun, but it's free. It's all DC. The lights are DC, LED from the sun. So urban farming, I think, if we get into urban farming, I would like to see a little micro drip irrigation system that waters all your plants automatically. There are sensors that as the sun rises, they turn on, or early in the morning or late in the evening. So you can do drip irrigation for your home. You can use the excess power to light up your outdoor lighting in your house. So I think these are all small innovations that entrepreneurs will begin to work on. And the last aspect before I get off is that as we build this solar platform, we are reaching out to entrepreneurs across the world to work with us so that we can innovate in this platform, right? So any one of you who's doing work in agriculture as a startup, please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to see if there is a fit into our platform, agriculture platform.
So all of you believe that we are going to be growing our own food?
To some degree.
To some degree.
Sure, yes.
So does that mean ITC will not have a business 20 years from now?
No, we'll help people grow. That's one business.
Okay.
But when you look at homes as farms, I think it is probably, in our wildest estimate, probably will get about 20% of total food consumption. The big part of it essentially has to come from elsewhere. And if you want me to take some time elaborating on how these homes as farms will really work.
Yes, please do.
And when I said we'll help people grow farms at home, it's not in lighter vein. A fair amount of work has been happening for the last 3 years already, and we'll see this going forward after the business model is completely ready. Ultimately, people growing food, as in things like vegetables and green leaves and many other stuff at home, vertically in the balconies and the backyards and wherever, will need continuous supply of various products, whether it is mini production systems where it is simply open and do it yourself kind of stuff, or seeds, or nutrients. So this is one model that will work in terms of literally akin to packaged consumer goods moving into homes. It is packaged agricultural production goods that will move into homes. So this is one model that we see applicable to some homes. The other kind, where people have space, people have willingness to invest, people would like to grow their own food, but don't necessarily have green fingers, time, whatever. And we see interesting models emerging there on a build, own and operate kind of basis. You're outsourcing your balcony space, and entrepreneurs and service providers are going home to home and will pick up a few homes, and so an expertise is developed there in terms of growing stuff there as another model. A third model which is gaining some traction, which is not exactly homes as farms, but communities of consumers partnering with communities of producers. It may be a distance away, it may be 100 kilometers away from the cities, but an aggregate of
Like a
5,000 households tying up with 500 farmers and then saying that this is what we want, this is how we grow, and then they get delivered at appropriate points of time. And there's an aggregator who is connecting them, and plenty of transactions digitally. So it's a connected, closed user group that you grow, and these groups are able to produce literally again 2/3 of all the consumption needs. Another 1/3 you buy from open market.
So I'm going to interrupt you 1 minute, right? We haven't talked about cost here at all, right? I mean, there, at least in the Indian context, there is a price pressure from the consumer side, politically, government-led, from what people are willing to sort of pay. How do some of these kinds of solutions economically make sense?
Not yet. When you put cost holistically in terms of saying health, nutrition, carbon footprint, and various kinds of issues.
Which from the consumer side,
no, that's the reason it is in your wildest dreams it can get to 20% is what I'm saying. But they'll start. Like you couldn't even imagine mainstreaming of solar energy 10 years ago, unless there's a huge amount of subsidy. Today you see that while
People
subsidies continue, but I think it is possible to do many things, and we just heard, I'm not talking about some of them. So I think as the market starts adopting, and as the volumes expand, both there is innovation interest coming in as well as production costs changing. So it will not happen in a hurry, but here we are talking about a slightly longer term. But yes, in the short run, obviously protected agriculture and urban, all of this is at a significantly higher cost. But people are adopting, experimenting, trialing, and so I think that will lead the path.
Okay. Do you see this happening elsewhere in the globe as well?
It's happening everywhere, in the sense that, what we actually see is there is a need to change completely the mindset and the way they work. And it's also adding up in other sectors. For example, we supported teams. There is one Airbnb that actually is renting the tractors and all the equipment, because most of this equipment, most of the time, they're not in use. So they're developing platforms that can share, so reduce the cost.
There are a lot of things being tried out here.
Exactly.
I have another question for you. You said 100 startups across agriculture, across the globe. Which is your most favorite one? He asked me this question 10 minutes back, so I'm turning this around to you. Which is your most favorite one? Which is the one that you think will have the largest impact on the problems?
Depends. We have quite a few, and depends on the. For example,
I'll let you pick a couple.
Kohler is one of the startup we supported. These guys, they developed a collar for the animals, and actually is transmitting radio waves that relaxing the animal, so they produce better quality and more milk.
Okay.
Very recently, Aston Kutcher invested in them, and there is some other guys. I'll tell you, Cropex. It's an irrigation system, an Israeli startup that is completely controlled by an app. We have some other guys that they do actually home agriculturing. It's like a small box, a care box that they produce the daily portion of any fruit and vegetables you need. So you see,
these are some of the ones that you think that are.
Also, there was in Africa, in a village, a guy developed a small refrigerator completely from solar panel.
Yeah.
So that wasn't so innovative, but at the same time, it solved a huge problem where there's no electricity, because now the whole community gathers and get one of these refrigerators for $100, and they keep their food for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Do you still see the pumps that you're doing? I mean, what kind of scale? How do you see this actually the market adoption of sort of, the kind of technology that you're speaking about? How do you envision that playing out?
It's very simple. Governments today is spending close to $6 billion on diesel and electricity subsidy. right? We give free power to farmers. We give free diesel to farmers. The only way to get out of this cycle is to somehow replace these 25 million inefficient pumps with solar technology, right? And highly efficient brushless DC technologies.
So someone, sorry, I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Someone once, this gentleman from Gujarat said that if every farmer in India had a solar pump, water pump, we would have no groundwater left.
Yes, so
right?
that's the reason.
So,
that's the reason we have
it
drip
made me
irrigation.
think, I have to say. So
Depleting water tables, yeah.
So do you see not having water tables 20
No,
years down the
I
line?
I see depleting water table as a problem because if you look at rice, primarily, the way rice is grown is flood irrigation. Basically, they take water and just flood it. And the reason they flood a field is because they get only 2 to 3 hours of electricity a day. So a farmer gets electricity morning 3 o'clock when no one else in India is using it. This person has to get out of bed, run across the field, turn on his pump, and flood it for the next 3 hours, right? So what is the option for this? Now, right now in this farm, we call it an innovation sandbox, right here, the 8-acre farm that I'm working with this technology. This guy's useful sun is about 5.5 hours if you're doing solar energy, right? But we have some technologies that allow the water to start coming as early as 7 o'clock in the morning. It goes up to 5. So we have now integrated drip irrigation into his system, so he doesn't waste the water. So when he's not using the water with solar pumps, he's pushing the energy back to the grid. And we net meter it out and actually pay money. Yeah, so solar becomes a cash crop. Right? This is something the government is doing. And our Honorable Prime Minister is extremely motivated for integrating solar into agriculture platforms. So, and we see tons of entrepreneurs doing fantastic work. There's a company called Organic Thali, right here in Hyderabad. So what Organic Thali does is, he links up with all the organic farms around the region. He sources vegetables that he cooks in his kitchen in Hyderabad. And he makes up this organic thali that's completely organic, no pesticides at all, right? And he gives them to local corporations. And it's a phenomenal work where you're integrating some of this, backward integrating the rural change that is happening in agriculture into the cities.
Okay. So you see Stanley Black & Decker having these across?
Stanley Black & Decker's purpose is to make this world a better place. Okay? Social innovation, business development is interlinked. You can't really do business in the future without having a social change, creating a social change. You'll see more and more organizations. You might want to talk about the Philip Morris. You just told me he's got an amazing story, and I want you guys to listen to it if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
The case of Philip Morris International and how it transformed, for me, it was a breakthrough. It's a huge tobacco industry. They decided to reinvent themselves without being obliged to do so. You know how close they work with legislation and how big they are. But they decided actually to create a device, and the whole company is transforming actually to a healthcare company from a tobacco company. And they invested 1.5 billion in their R&D, and through an open innovation model, which is also quite interesting and important. And they developed this device IQOS, which is actually changing completely the way we smoke. When you light a cigarette, as you do now, it goes up to 900 degrees, the temperature. But with this, they boil the cigarette. They still use tobacco, but smaller portion of tobacco, and you insert the cigarette in this device, and through boiling, it goes up to 300 degrees. So it's 90% less harmful. And this is just the first step through their transition. But imagine a company that creates billions of revenues and profit annually, how decide to actually disrupt itself and go into a different angle, which is quite... And this is what actually, through Future Agro Challenge, also we try to do. We're trying to create we work with corporates, creating a startup corporate engagement platform and help this open innovation model, bring close the startups to the big corporates, and that disrupt their industry as well.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because at one level, this conference has a theme of women and women in innovation and entrepreneurship. So I would love to get the panel's views here on, um, do you think some of these innovations or the trends that we have talked about will impact women in the farming sector in a positive or a negative way? More participation, you know, or less of it as it becomes a factory where actually nobody ever goes there. You know, how do you see that happening? There's been a feminization of agriculture, and if I'm not wrong, I know it's been there in India. I believe in some other countries as well, like for example, the UK, there have been more women who have gone into being farm entrepreneurs, if I may say that. Will technology actually drive more of that or less of it?
No, I think if I say one context in which look at women entrepreneurs along the value chains that we work in, this is more upstream in the farming, in the process of farming. The new age entrepreneurial engagement with women's self-help groups is in providing inputs and services to the farms. And within the larger canvas of how we are visualizing agriculture will change. If you are saying you need farms as designer factories producing organic inputs and other kinds of precision farming and so on, so you move from seed to sapling as a planting material, the opportunity for higher productivity is much greater. So a number of women self-help groups today are engaged in the value chains to produce those saplings. And those centers where these are produced access all these technologies, whether it is sensors, whether it is protected kind of cultivation and so on. Organic inputs obviously is other kind of a thing which is there. As well as you also look at services. And in the physical inputs, there's also large activity that's happening in the form of a growing medium. In terms of you don't necessarily just use soil, especially when you are looking at trays for saplings to be carried for final usage. So producing growing media like cocoa peat and other kinds of nutrient mixes is another activity. All these things are ideally done closer to the farms, otherwise your transportation costs are high and you're not localizing your needs. So therefore a number of women from farming families getting into this kind of entrepreneurial activity, we are seeing a rapid expansion of that. The other is provision of services, whether it's custom hiring centers of the kind of mechanization that we just heard in terms of managing that, or complete services in terms of spraying service and those kinds of things. So I think all of this is reducing the drudgery component of what conventionally women faced in farming and improving the knowledge quotient of the services that they are providing, and therefore leading to both higher incomes and better quality is what we are seeing in the upstream end of farming. So I think much of this, and the reason I was saying self-help groups and all of that is also possibly an essential component, because then your ability to reach out to financial institutions, access funds to set up this kind of enterprise, all of that becomes far easier as opposed to individuals trying to do this kind of business. It also spreads out the risk and so on and so forth, and we are seeing this quite widely getting adopted now.
So any other reasons why women would become part of this besides, because self-help groups also have a lot of women in them, right? Is there any other areas you feel that this would enable or encourage, or it's at this at that group level kind of activity?
Yeah, no, one is as your level of precision improves.
Yeah.
Generally, the tendency is that women are taking those kind of roles a lot more, whether it is in things like electronic industries and so on, and that is what we are seeing. As farms move into more precision-led kind of areas,
would see more women,
you would see much less of that physical power that is required, and therefore one handicap is women were still subjected to a lot of physical activities on the farms.
Right.
But that drudgery will get reduced now, and as the precision component is going up, then that is also naturally something which is getting as a second nature of women.
You reminded me of a story that I read about a farmer in UK, a woman farmer in the UK who was in they had cows on the farm, and she came and told a colleague how a cow had just given birth, and the colleague said, expected that he was supposed to come help her in the calving process, and she's like, no, yeah, I'm all done. This is all that sort of happened. And the end of the article says, men would use brute force to hold the cow down and all of that. And women have figured out cows like food. You give them food, they will listen to whatever has to be done here. So there was innovation,